Story 1. Joe Arity was a mentally disabled man executed because he resembled a criminal. He played with a train in jail and gave it to a fellow inmate to hold until he returned. He requested ice cream as his final meal and later asked for it to be placed in the freezer to finish later. Then he was put in a gas chamber. Story 2. Cameron Todd Willingham. His 3 children died in a house fire. Arson investigators declared that the fire must have been set intentionally. Psychologists testified that he showed signs of being a sociopath. All of these experts have been discredited. The only evidence of accelerant found in the house were trace amounts of lighter fluid on the porch where a charcoal grill was kept. Evidence for his sociopathy included a tattoo of a flaming skull and an Iron Maiden poster that he owned. His cellmate testified that he had confessed to the murder and later recanted it, stating he only did so in exchange for early release. Despite all of this, Texas still executed him. Story 3. One of Canada's worst decisions was letting Karla Homolka off on a plea deal before they discovered how she was involved in the rape and murder of at least 3 youth, including her younger sister. Paul Bernardo did not act alone. Story 4. The Salem witch trials. Once accused, any of the tests led to death, proving you were in fact a witch. Story 5. I think a good case could be made for Feng Xiaoru. In ancient and medieval China, it was common in several dynasties to practice the 9 familial exterminations for especially serious crimes. The entire extended family was wiped out, referring to how many degrees of connection would be killed. One of the worst cases was that of Feng Xiaoru, who refused to write a flattering speech for the emperor and essentially called him a usurper. The emperor threatened him with the 9 exterminations, and Feng Xiaoru flippantly said he should go ahead and make it 10. The emperor ended up killing 873 people just for being tangentially connected to Feng Xiaoru. Story 6. A 24-year-old Belgian medical student raped a drunk girl. In court, he admitted to planning and carrying out the rape. He was not charged because he is still young, and being charged with rape would have made his future as a gynecologist too difficult. The exact words of the judge were, "It is undeniable that he crossed the line of what is permissible. The man showed a lack of respect for the victim's physical, psychological, and sexual boundaries. However, he is still young and has no criminal record. He is also a talented and committed person in both his professional and private life. By finding him guilty but not punishing him, he will be made to feel guilty, and the chance of him reoffending will be prevented without socially impairing the man." Story 7. The British Post Office convicted nearly 1,000 postmasters over 26 years because of fraudulent accounting. It turned out the Fujitsu system was incorrectly recording amounts. When the postmasters complained, they were told they were the only ones having issues, so it could not be the system. People were imprisoned and some committed suicide. The leadership of the post office bought the silence of distraught families and made them sign settlement agreements and non-disclosure agreements. The woman at the top, Paula Venables, was awarded a Commander of the Order of the British Empire, the highest rank given other than knight or damehoods. But this honor has since been revoked by King Charles. Story 8. The fact that the bankers who caused the 2008 financial crisis were never punished. Their debt effectively became government debt, leading to austerity measures worldwide and plunging hundreds of millions of people into poverty, while further transferring wealth to those who cheated others out of it. This austerity and worsening living conditions paved the way for Brexit and Donald Trump, individuals who feed on the anger and bitterness of people living in difficulties. It can all be traced back to those greedy criminals who did this and profited immensely. Story 9. The wrongful execution of George Stinney Jr., a 14-year-old black boy executed by electric chair in 1944 after a trial that lasted less than 3 hours and a jury that deliberated for just 10 minutes. He was exonerated 70 years later. Story 10. Soldiers in Myanmar rampaged through several villages, raping, beheading, and killing at least 17 people around 2023, in a series of war crimes since the army seized power. Victims were detained by the military and in some cases tortured before being killed. Story 11. The deal Karla Homolka made. She did not just help her boyfriend and eventual husband lure young women and get away with multiple rapes and murders. She drugged her own younger sister and allowed him to rape her as a Christmas present. She convinced the police that her sister died of a drug overdose for years. This was before the other rapes and murders. She could have ended the relationship but chose instead to help him harm other women. She made a deal with the police after he started hitting her. She was given a minimal sentence and is free today. He received a life sentence in prison due to how brutal the Barbie and Ken killings were. Story 12. Jimmy Savile, considered to be one of Britain's most prolific pedophiles and sexual predators, died before ever being charged with a crime. Hundreds of people came forward after his death, but by then it was too late to take action. Reports received by the police and other authorities about Savile, along with his bizarre behavior, were ignored while he was alive. Story 13. The case of Junko Furuta. It upsets me that hundreds of people participated and the few who were punished received relatively light sentences. Do not read about the case unless you are prepared to feel empty for a few hours. It is like Unit 741 levels of cruelty. Edit. I misremembered part of the case. At least 100 people participated in the abuse and torture. Story 14. In the United States, one of the worst events I can think of was the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. No charges were ever filed, no habeas corpus, no due process of any kind. Just imprisonment for being of Japanese origin and nothing more. A woman I worked with many years ago was born in one of those camps, and she had an older brother who died from some untreated illness while being held there. Story 15. Pol Pot caused a genocide. Most, if not all, Cambodians living today are the children of those who were killed. He was never punished and lived a life of opulence and peace, dying at 72. This may not be the biggest example, but it is what instantly comes to mind for me. Visiting the killing fields and listening to the stories was a sobering experience that I believe everyone should have in some form. Story 16. The Dred Scott decision is considered the worst Supreme Court decision and the Supreme Court's greatest self-inflicted wound. Story 17. Brock Turner. Not the worst but a serious injustice. Ethan Couch. De Affluenzatin. Here is a good list of some miscarriage of justice cases. Story 18. Casey Anthony. I know the death of one toddler does not compare to the multiple actual genocides others have mentioned, but Casey Anthony is a murderer. She killed a defenseless little baby, got away with it, and she continues giving interviews talking about the real killer. Story 19. I was grouped with the children who had birthdays over the summer instead of receiving a personal announcement over the intercom. Story 20. The Dreyfus Affair is one of the most significant events in history. Even when it was clear he was not guilty, the establishment still could not back down. It foreshadowed the role of Ludendorff and the loss on the Western Front not long after. Story 21. As an Irishman, the Birmingham 6 case was outrageous. Innocent men were tortured by British police to sign confessions to an Irish Republican Army bombing. One of them was Jerry Conlon. His father Giuseppe traveled to England to help his son and was also subsequently imprisoned, later dying in prison an innocent man. Not only was it revealed years later that they were all innocent, it was also revealed that the British knew they were innocent all along and hid evidence that supported their innocence. Story 22. Alan Turing was crucial to the Allied victory in World War II. He was persecuted and suffered greatly because of his sexual orientation, ultimately taking his own life. Story 23. Okay. I guess I can say the O.J. Simpson trial. Those prosecutors should have been ashamed. Just an awful trial all over. It did not help at all. Story 24. Richard Jewell was unfairly treated by the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the American news media. He was the security guard who discovered the pipe bomb hidden at the 1996 Olympics in Atlanta. His actions undoubtedly saved lives that day, and he did his job well. However, the Federal Bureau of Investigation decided it was suspicious that a low-level security guard had accomplished something significant. They presumed he must have planted the bomb himself. Jumping to that conclusion was offensive and demeaning, though the Federal Bureau of Investigation can be somewhat understood for exercising professional skepticism. What is unforgivable is that they leaked an evidence-less theory to the press in an attempt to pressure Jewell, the blue-collar good guy who was caught up by chance. The Federal Bureau of Investigation and the press, both chasing ratings, essentially ruined Jules' life. He mostly became a recluse and died in middle age. Story 25. I don't know if this is what you mean, but the Kim dynasty in Korea, Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, and now Kim Jong-un, has committed some of the worst human rights violations in history. Reading the aquariums of Pyongyang is truly sickening and makes me wonder why North Korea isn't discussed on the news every day. Story 26. Alan Turing saved 10 to 15 million lives by decoding the Enigma code. He should have had statues and parades in his honor. He died in shame, squalor, and misery because he was gay. Story 27. Lindsay Chamberlain was wrongfully convicted of murdering her daughter and later became a meme because of it. Story 28. Worcester versus Georgia and the Indian Removal Act. The United States Supreme Court ruled that the Cherokee Nation was sovereign and did not need to adhere to the rules established by Georgia to give up their land. President Andrew Jackson knew the court had no officials to enforce this ruling and signed the Indian Removal Act, which caused the Trail of Tears. Story 29. The residential schools. We recovered mass graves of indigenous children who attended those horrible schools just a few years ago. Story 30. It is more modern, but West Memphis 3. Not only did 3 teenage boys lose their freedom, one was on death row for decades, but those 3 young men also died tragically and will never receive justice. All because one police officer was obsessed with Satan worshippers and created mass panic. Story 31. In terms of criminal injustice, 2 cases that immediately come to mind are the Menendez brothers, who should have been released long ago, and the murder of Jason Corbett, where his 2 murderers should not be walking free. Regarding social injustice in Ireland, the mother and baby homes and the clerical abuse scandals stand out. The Catholic Church has a lot to answer for in this regard. Story 32. George Stinney Jr., a 14-year-old black boy accused, jailed, tried, and executed for murdering 2 young white girls, Mary Emma Thames, age 7, and Betty June Binnicker, age 11, in 1944 in South Carolina. Mary and Betty were searching for maypop flowers and asked George and his sister Em where they were. Their bodies were later found dead in a ditch. Someone told police they had seen George talking to the girls. He was taken in for a lengthy interrogation. He had no lawyer, and his parents were not present. Some reports state he was deprived of food and then promised ice cream if he confessed. George did confess, but his sister stated he had been with her during the time the girls would have been murdered. George's family maintained his innocence, but he was taken to a jail 50 miles away. His family was unable to see him while he was jailed or during the trial. George's trial lasted just over 2 hours. The jury returned a guilty verdict in 10 minutes. George's attorney, who was a tax commissioner and not a trial attorney, called no witnesses. He did not challenge the police officers on how they obtained the confession and did not challenge the prosecution when they presented 2 contradicting versions of events based on George's conflicting confessions. George was 5 feet 1 inch tall and weighed 95 pounds. From a physical standpoint, it seems impossible for George to have subdued 2 girls, hit one over the head with a heavy railroad spike while subduing the other, hit the other girl with the spike, and then transport their bodies to a different location all without being seen. George was able to see his family only once before his execution. He was too small for the electric chair and its straps and needed to sit on a book to reach. His parents buried him in an unmarked grave to deter vandalism. Story 33. Not sure if it is the worst, but not completely holding every fascist accountable after World War II definitely helped lead to where we are today. The United States welcomed multiple Nazis into the country for research purposes. Every one of those war criminals should have faced what they deserved. Story 34. June 6th. I think something in America broke when we watched the most serious assault on our democracy in generations get dismissed for political gain. So many Americans did the right thing and turned in their neighbors, friends, and family members to make sure justice was served, only to watch the man most responsible for the violence escape conviction for political reasons, avoid every attempt to hold him accountable, win re-election, and pardon most of the January 6 participants who were actually duly convicted. Story 35. The execution of the Romanov family occurred 1 year after the abdication of Nicholas II. A hemophiliac child and 4 daughters who did nothing wrong and could not be blamed for the failures of their father were brutally shot, bayonet, mutilated, and buried in a forest for 70 years. This event was quickly glossed over, and the responsible people continued as if nothing had happened. Story 36. Alan Turing was a genius who helped Britain win the war and was the father of the computer. It is horrific that his own government treated him like a criminal and an animal, driving him to suicide just because he was gay. I think his is one of the saddest fates anyone has had in modern times. Story 37. Surely the answer should be the Holocaust. Victimized, bullied, declared criminals, illegally held in prison camps, and brutally executed because they chose to believe a slightly different book. Story 38. The execution of George Stinney Jr. He was executed at the age of 14 and was later found to be wrongfully convicted. The photos of him about to be executed are heartbreaking. He was so small he could not even fit in the electric chair. Story 39. The hanging of Galileo. The prosecution of Alan Turing, Oscar Wilde, and countless others for being gay. Story 40. Australian John Palfreeman was in Sofia, Bulgaria, in 2007 when he tried to defend a Roma man being assaulted by a group of youths. During the altercation, he stabbed one of the attackers in self-defense, who later died. The deceased's family was highly connected in political circles, and through a corrupt trial, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. While incarcerated, he became the chair of the Bulgarian Prisoners Association. Story 41. In all of known history, it is impossible to decide. In modern times, perhaps Idi Amin remaining a free man and dying of old age is an example. Not facing justice was definitely a miscarriage of justice. Story 42. Reconstruction in America was failing, and the lynching deaths that followed affected the next century. Less than 1/3 of 1% of all lynchings were ever prosecuted. Story 43. Albert Göring, younger brother of Hermann Göring. He was opposed to National Socialism and helped Jews as well as other groups persecuted by the National Socialists. Just because he was the brother of one of the worst National Socialists and shared a name with him, he was treated very poorly. Honestly, as someone who is a true crime enthusiast, it is horrible how siblings of people who do bad things get treated. They can be the nicest, sweetest person who does everything right, and if they have even one sibling who is a bad person, their entire lives can be torn apart. It is even more sad when you realize they are usually the first victims of their sibling. Story 44. George Stinney, a 14-year-old African-American, was arrested in 1944 for raping and murdering 2 white girls in South Carolina. He was accused because the girls had once stopped by his house. The boy was not allowed to see his parents during his 81 days of custody and was tried in front of an all-white jury. There were no clear witnesses, no weapons retrieved, but the boy was sentenced to death. He was put in the electric chair, and it is said that a Bible was placed under him because he was too small for the chair. His parents were not allowed to be present during his execution. During his custody, his parents were fired from work and had to leave their house. The case was reopened in 2004, and George was found not guilty. Story 45. The Tulsa race riots in Oklahoma in 1921. Story 46. How about Operation Paperclip at the end of World War II? That was when American politicians, deciding that evil should be bargained with, essentially gave full permission to Nazi war criminals trained as scientists and allowed them residency and jobs in the United States in exchange for their research. Story 47. So many, but Emmett Till immediately comes to mind. User 889634416 hit the nail on the head with their comment below. Story 48. The way the United States government destroyed Native American culture and people is often overlooked. Why do I always hear about Adolf Hitler killing 6 million Jews when 10 million Native Americans were killed? Story 49. Rodney King. The video showed he was not fighting back and was not a threat when 7 police officers kept beating him nearly to death. All officers got away with it with no recompense. Story 50. Fred West hanged himself in his cell before he could be put on trial for all those murders. Story 51. How is slavery not the first and only answer from all of us? Complete withholding of human rights from entire populations of people. Story 52. Any lynching of any sex, any race, and at any time is wrong. Right now, people are convicted of crimes in court and sentenced to multiple years in prison, life imprisonment, or death. Hundreds have been set free because DNA evidence proved another person committed the crime they were accused of. Notable cases of injustice come to mind, often from the past. They serve as beacons and signposts urging us to be vigilant against vile behavior toward innocent people. History's worst miscarriage of justice is the one society got wrong and has yet to discover. Story 53. I live in Prince Edward Island, Canada. There was a fraud case where the offender should have been sent to federal prison but instead received a light penalty. It was the case of 70-year-old Lowell Oakes. Mr. Oakes ran Dawson Funeral Home in Crapo, Prince Edward Island until August 2021, when he was charged with 66 counts of fraud, 36 counts of fraud over $5,000 and 30 counts of fraud under $5,000. The fraud charges were related to pre-planned funeral arrangements. Under the Funeral Directors Act, a funeral director must place the funds for a pre-planned funeral into a trust fund within 30 days of making the funeral arrangements. Mr. Oakes did not comply with this requirement. Instead, he took the money and spent it on personal needs and to support his gambling addiction. By the time he was charged, he had defrauded 66 people out of $425,000. He pleaded guilty to all charges and was sentenced to 2 years less 1 day in jail. Despite the sentence, he was released on parole within 6 months. He was ordered to pay restitution, but because he declared bankruptcy, it is unlikely he will be able to repay the money. He should have been sent to federal prison. Defrauding people out of their funeral funds is unforgivable. Story 54. The railroading of Charles McVay, the skipper of the United States ship Indianapolis, occurred after the ship's sinking following its delivery of atomic bomb parts to Tinian in late July 1945. During his court-martial, the Navy called to the stand the skipper of the submarine that sank the Indianapolis. However, he testified that there was nothing McVay could have done to avoid the sinking. It has been speculated that Ernest J. King, the then chief of naval operations, overturned Admiral Chester Nimitz's decision not to court-martial McVay as a form of revenge. King was previously under McVay's father's command when he sneaked some women onto their ship, an incident that led to a letter of reprimand being placed in King's file. McVay was formally exonerated in the 1990s after a middle school student's history project on the incident prompted congressional hearings. Unfortunately, it was too late for McVay to see this. After 23 years of receiving letters and phone calls from families of fallen crew members blaming him for the tragedy, despite being held blameless by most, if not all, of the surviving crew members, he took his own life on his back porch on November 6, 1968. In a sense, McVay was the final victim of that tragedy. Story 55. So many events have resulted in loss of lives that it is hard to say which one is worse, but the Holocaust comes to mind as one of history's worst. Story 56. Possibly a miscarriage of justice that never came to light, where everyone still believes an innocent person or people deserved what they received. Story 57. One I just learned. Matthew Broderick. While he was in Northern Ireland in 1987, he fell asleep at the wheel and caused a head-on collision, killing a mother and daughter in the other car. He was charged with causing death by dangerous driving but was only convicted of careless driving. His total punishment was a 100-pound fine for killing 2 people. Story 58. The French Revolution. What started as an attempt to create a parliamentary system became mass murder in the streets of Paris and the unjustified killing of the royal family. Story 59. Natives of various lush and beautiful lands had others come, plant a flag, and kill them all to claim it as found. Then those others destroy that beautiful, lush land, just like they did in the place they came from. Story 60. Andrew Mallard was an Australian who was wrongfully convicted of murder in 1995 and sentenced to life imprisonment. Almost 12 years later, after an appeal to the High Court of Australia, his conviction was quashed and a retrial was ordered. However, the charges against him were dropped. He was released from prison in 2006 after his conviction was quashed by the High Court and was paid $3.25 million in compensation by the state government. He died in 2019 in Los Angeles after being involved in a hit and run, where the driver fled the scene. This was very tragic. Story 61, My Lai Massacre. The soldiers did not receive the punishments they deserved for their heinous crimes. Story 62. If you are from Toronto or the Greater Toronto Area in Canada, the following information may be familiar. A billionaire's son was driving intoxicated after his bachelor's party. He caused a fatal accident that instantly killed 3 children and their grandfather. Despite the severity of the incident, he only served 5 years in prison. The father of the children later committed suicide. This case highlights concerns about the Canadian justice system. Story 63. The United States Operation Paperclip and the cancellation of denazification in the American, British, and French-controlled territories in Germany immediately following the end of World War II. President Truman canceled the denazification plans because the former Nazis could be allies against the Communist bloc. Some of the first leaders within the North Atlantic Treaty Organization were former Nazi Party members and Wehrmacht generals. This was a gross miscarriage of justice for all the people who were genocided by those fascist perpetrators. Story 64. Let us not forget the Spanish Inquisition as well. It was possibly one of the darkest times in human history, especially for Christianity. Countless cultures, knowledge, and traditions were completely destroyed to purge all the so-called heathens from the world. Story 65. How many Germans responsible for Third Reich crimes escaped justice because the West needed an ally against the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics in West Germany and eventually gave in to Konrad Adenauer's false claim that denazification was the greatest injustice of our times and ended it? Second place goes to the United States after the Civil War, where they did not even attempt their equivalent to denazification and instead chose to reconcile with the former slaveholders in the name of Reconstruction. Every case of right-wing regression since then, from Jim Crow laws through Ronald Reagan to Donald Trump, has its roots in that tragic decision. Story 66. Whoever thought it was smart to start something like that Elon School in Maine? There is a reason why many therapeutic boarding schools get a bad reputation, even by those who were lucky never to be sent. Someone at one of the schools I attended recommended I be treated in one of those, but my parents told them to leave me alone. In hindsight, my parents made the right choice. Life in the neighborhood was already hellish enough, but you do gain respect. Story 67. Alan Turing was one of the founding fathers of computer science and artificial intelligence. He laid the groundwork for computational machines and broke the Nazi Enigma code during World War II, which shifted the tide towards the Allies. After the war, the British government imprisoned him for being gay and subjected him to chemical castration, after which he committed suicide. Story 68. Justin Trudeau fired his attorney general because she would not overlook illegal dealings of a corporation. She even recorded his subordinates calling and pressuring her. Story 69. Sacco and Vanzetti was a dangerous moment in American history. Globally, I would say apartheid law as a whole. Story 70. Kaylee Anthony. Instead of pursuing second-degree or any lesser charge, the state thought they could get her on first-degree murder. She has been out ever since, and she does not deserve it. Story 71. The Rotherham child sexual exploitation scandal. Authorities delayed investigating it because they were afraid of being seen as racist since many of the suspects were of Asian origin. Story 72. Casey Anthony was found not guilty. She committed the crime, and her parents helped cover it up afterward. Story 73. Portraying the Palestinians as the villains when they are simply trying to avoid being exterminated. Story 74. In World War II, communists were prosecuted. In my country, many communists were in the resistance and organized a large and important strike to protest the Holocaust. After the war, communists were banned from both the remembrance of the strike and the remembrance of the entire war. Imagine being prosecuted, actively resisting the oppressor, and then not being welcome when it is time to remember, with people actively trying to erase all you have done. Story 75. Poland suffered greatly during World War II when it was invaded and ultimately subjected to Soviet rule for decades. Story 76. O.J. Simpson literally got away with murder because of his celebrity. He was a vile, despicable creature. Story 77. Was there a case in England where 3 people were executed for the same crime, with the first 2 wrongfully convicted? Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.